Leonardo Di Caprio's Ernest Burkhart is the main character in Martin Scorsese's new film Killers of the Flower Moon, and here's what happened to the real-life person after the events of the film. Although Killers of the Flower Moon is incredibly long and features an in-depth look at the Osage murders case, the film is surprisingly light on details regarding what happened to the characters after their respective trials. Although the story of Killers of the Flower Moon is fantastic, it is about real people, and these people's lives went on long after the credits rolled. Thus, there's a lot to cover regarding Ernest Burkhart's fate after Killers of the Flower Moon. Ernest Burkhart was paroled in 1937, 11 years after Killers of the Flower Moon. Killers of the Flower Moon concludes with Ernest Burkhart being sent to prison even after testifying against his uncle, leading many to wonder how long he stayed there. The film does mention that Ernest Burkhart was paroled, but it doesn't go too far into when or why. However, some more details regarding the fate of Ernest Burkhart can be found when looking beyond the events of Killers of the Flower Moon. Ernest Burkhart was sentenced to life in prison in 1926 for his hand in the murder of Molly's sisters. However, only 11 years after being sentenced, Ernest Burkhart was paroled. Although Burkhart may have thought that he lucked out, his parole status didn't last long. Interestingly, Burkhart isn't even the one who ended up the most unscathed from the trials and prison sentences. Burkhart's uncle, William Kinghale, was pardoned in 1947, although many members of the Osage protested this. Although both men served some prison time for the crimes they committed against the Osage, many argued that it wasn't enough. Ernest went back to prison after the movie. Although Ernest Burkhart was initially granted parole for his hand in the Osage murders, the man ended up going back to prison after the events of Killers of the Flower Moon. Not long after being granted parole, Burkhart robbed his former sister-in-law Lily Morrill Burkhart. Burkhart was sentenced to prison again for this robbery in 1941. Burkhart stayed in prison until he again applied for parole. To the surprise of many, the Oklahoma Parole Board granted Burkhart parole in 1966, with the group citing his hand in the Osage murder investigation as a reason for granting it to him. Later, Ernest Burkhart was fully pardoned by the governor of Oklahoma, shocking many individuals who had been following the case. Ernest attempted to reconnect with his family. After the events of Killers of the Flower Moon, Ernest Burkhart attempted to reconnect with his family, was able to connect with Margie Burkhart, the granddaughter of Ernest and Molly Burkhart, the main characters in Killers of the Flower Moon. Margie recounts the first time she met her grandfather with an elderly Ernest coming to her house. Margie is one of the few living descendants of Ernest Burkhart, as the Osage murders killed off most of their family tree. However, the fact that Ernest Burkhart attempted to meet Margie shows that he still wanted to reconnect with his family after his time in prison. When Ernest Burkhart died and how old he was, Ernest Burkhart lived until December 1, 1986, when he died in Cleveland, Oklahoma. Burkhart was born on September 11, 1892, meaning that he lived until the age of 94. Burkhart managed to live over 2 decades as a free man after being pardoned by the governor of Oklahoma, with him spending his last years attempting to reconnect with his family. Killers of the Flower Moon paints Ernest Burkhart as a complicated man, with him doing horrible atrocities towards his own family as the broader Osage people. Still, he also seemed to truly love his wife throughout the film. It is impossible to know if Killers of the Flower Moon was truly able to capture the thoughts and motivations that were inside the real-life individual's head. As has been seen, the film left out a lot of details about the aftermath of the case. The chilling and controversial film has brought the investigation back into the limelight, with many viewers first hearing about the Osage murders in Killers of the Flower Moon.